Welcome back to Side Quest VIII. I think I only got two of the eyes in last time, but
I think I
appropriate
heard.
amount of eyes this time around. This is the curse of getting to hear myself after having been recorded. So happy birthday to me later. That said, Wes, it's good to see you again, and it's good to see you here to talk about timber again, some old technology, and
Mm,
another dream sequence that we did not get through, but two
mhm.
this time. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I didn't actually get to the dream sequence. I almost got there. I'm in the forest right before the forest where it supposedly will start. So I'm anyway, yeah, but Timber is a cool place. I liked getting to spend a little more time there this week. And then I was also running around doing some silly side quests like I do. So
What kind of side quests were you doing? I was definitely keeping you in mind while I was playing this time. As usual, slightly strapped for time, but I had actually planned it out perfectly because I made it to the dream sequence and into the dream sequence just a little bit because from your texts, I thought you were pretty into the dream sequence, but you must have been reading ahead, and perhaps you can hip us to
yeah.
what is coming. But I played some cards
Mm,
right after
right.
a new card and then was given actually a second card for my honesty, though I
Mm,
wasn't that honest when I was talking to this drunkard that I had to get to move for me. But I
mm,
didn't actually have enough money to buy him enough drinks to get him to move. So it turned out telling him about the card that he had lost to a Galbadian soldier that I had defeated and then gotten his card for him was uh, it was the right move to tell him that I had his card and
yes.
gave me another card. And with those two new cards and a free, I thought I could beat the next drunkard I saw in the gutter
Yeah.
outside of there, and I promptly lost. And I also didn't know the region's rules very.
Oh.
But I think I need one more good card before I can get into the card game. But that's my contribution to the question I asked you about which side quest you've been doing.
Oh, brother. There's a save point right there in the alley. Why didn't you just save it before you played him?
I did, and then I had to figure out on the PS4 how to turn it off and turn it back on,
Okay.
because it's a little bit more complicated because it's more like a computer than a traditional console in that
Mm,
respect. But I did the equivalent of that, and then I played him again and lost. And so I need to master the rules, figure out what they are. I've continued to play blind, which
mm.
I know is becoming more and more of a mistake. Though I will say that my GFs just learned strength junction and HP junction,
Hey.
and that's made things go fast. Also,
Hmm.
since I was behind you last time, so it's now nice to pull a little bit ahead.
Yes.
But
Yes. It's
you,
it's it is the portion of the game where you can start if you choose to pursue side quests. And the only one that I know of right now that seems available is connected up with the Queen of Cards. So if you talk to her when you first meet her in Balam, you can't really miss her because she's like standing right in front of the train station, right? And she's like this kind of red garb. She sort of stands out, right? And so you talk to her, and you don't have to play her in cards, but just by doing that, it it triggers, I guess, one of two things. So she'll either go one place, and there's like a three-quarters chance that she goes to that one place. I forget where it is, maybe Galbadia. Anyway, and then the quarter chance is that she'll go to Dalet instead, the town that we um,
Asian
went
Tower.
on our exam, right? And so so if you get that quarter chance to work, and there's like tricks to get that to happen, um, you want to lose a card to her. Oh, I guess you do have to play her cards because you had to lose a card to her, specifically the the Mog. So the Mog card, which is a rare one that you can get from that kid who runs around and around in the garden. So if you play him at cards, he might use the Mog card and you can win it from him. You lose the Mog card on purpose by having that be the best card in your hand and then losing on purpose, which isn't too hard. As we see, it's a hard game. Anyway, so if you don't play good cards, you'll lose. And then she'll get the Mog card. She'll say, I'm going wherever. Hopefully it's Dalet. And you reset until she says it's Dalet. And then when you go there, you just follow the road all the way from Timber to where the road dead ends is that port city of Dalit, and you'll find her in the pub. Seems like pubs and cards are kind of related. It's like a shady thing, maybe I don't know. And so she is up there, and she says, with that Mog card that I won from you, I can give it to my dad, and he can use it to get inspiration to make this Kyros card. Now, Kyros, of course, is one of Laguna's companions, right, from 20 years ago or whatever. So I'm really curious to see. Sorry, go ahead.
I just at 17. That's the number that I keep seeing, at
Ah,
least.
sorry, 17. Yes, yes, yes. We're so we're in it for the long haul here. We got steps on the way through this long side quest. Um, the other thing that she does, of course, is changes the rules in the regions where she goes to, and she's sort of like somehow in charge of that. Whereas her father, it turns out, is like the one who makes the cards, I guess, because he like draws the pictures for them. So again, this is something I'm like particularly curious about, is like this game within the game, right? Which almost sort of overshadows the actual game because of how important it is for being able to effectively progress and all this stuff. So anyway, so you
And
can
it's
keep doing you can keep doing the side quest at this point and go and get the Mog card back. Because she says, "Oh, I gave it to my brother or something, my kid brother." But apparently, according to what I've been reading, if you wait, you'll get a better card later, or rather, you'll get some better prizes as part of that portion of the side quest later if you wait till like disc 4 to get the card. And I don't need the card. I mean, it's good, but it's not as good as some of the other ones, right? It's no Seifer, it's no Quistis.
well, I'm looking forward to potentially, well, probably missing those cards and being upset when I do. But what's interesting about you talking about the game in the game is that the card game is fun and addicting. And you can play cards with all sorts of people, and especially characters you might not expect you could play cards with. And only very rarely do you get like chastised for even the attempt, which is sort of a funny thing about the game. But two things about that are that it reminds me of sort of having one's life set on a goal, and maybe that's manifested through one's career or one's family, but also in having a hobby. There's
Hmm.
like something that one spends one's day sort of following all day. So like I'm a CrossFitter. So occasionally when I used to teach before returning to academia, if there were a big competition on that started on Friday, I might have it on my computer screen so I could sort of follow it throughout the day.
Mm.
Um, but you're just reminding me of how we live parallel lives, um, given our depending on our pursuits, and and can even put a lot of effort into our parallel pursuits, even when the stakes seem to be much lower, though they may not be, right?
Yeah.
Like it may not seem like not that big a deal to go play softball, but maybe that's helping to stave off a heart attack. It may
Yes.
not seem like such a big deal to play cards when obviously you're this mercenary who is now who is currently under this enormous task that you only find out about in media res, where you must finish this mission
Hmm.
by ensuring that that Timber becomes a free nation, by freeing it from the yoke of Galbadia that has just gone on TV for the first time in 17 years, broadcast to everybody, and said that they're going to resolve all their problems with all the other nations, and that'll be that. So this seems like an impossible, insurmountable task.
Mm.
Um, Similar to winning a card game for me. But so card games seem like a much less important part of the game and part of your character's life because of that. But in fact, I think their value is just subliminal at this
Hmm.
moment. It's just impossible to see it for what it is. But what that excited me about is you've helped me to see that the question I asked about the game, whether you should read alongside it, learn the lore, watch YouTube videos, read a strategy guide. That's it. The right question isn't whether that's the right way to play the game. It's just that is a more informed way of playing it. It makes me think more about a course or like a college course or a college syllabus. It's like it's one thing to just go through the course and listen to the lectures.
Hmm.
One thing to go through the course and to listen to the lectures and read the books. And it's yet another thing to go through the course, read the lectures, or sorry, listen to the lectures, read the books, and also read the secondary literature,
Yeah. in the footnotes, get into the weeds. Yeah,
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 suggested reading that is,
yeah.
all the reading seems to be suggested reading these days. But those are just different levels of experience that one has access to, that it's hard to explain to the students that, well, actually, if you do the reading, you'll be much more enlightened than if you just listen to my lectures. And if you read the additional reading, you'll see that a lot of people make similar points to the ones I'm making. And in fact, I'm partially informed by these people making these points. And so you can see a little bit more into the process itself. There's just for even in college courses, they partake of the same structure to some extent as a game, and that one can get it more and more into
Mhm.
the course. One is offered these differing levels of experience. And so right now, what I find interesting is that even though I have played this game through, once failing to get past a certain point because I played so poorly, and then a second time, I am like when we went through Final Fantasy VII, not playing with the strategy guide yet. And I know, particularly because of all the things you've been saying to me during this podcast, that this is going to be a failing strategy, but I'm also experiencing less joy and richness from the game, even
Mhm.
though it's a game that I liked, because I'm not on experiencing the benefits and intricacies of this side quest.
Mhm.
Um, Even though the name of this segment is in fact side quests.
The irony. Oh gosh.
Get
So something you mentioned just made me see kind of a funny connection within the quest, right? Um, we are under contract to Renoa and the Owls, right? And they're one of many resistant organizations, and they seem to have good relationships with other resistance people. We see that towards the end of the sequence here, but
They're all in the forest. They're the owls, they're the foxes. I
the
think they're
foxes,
X, forest Y, forest Z. And
yeah,
forest means timber, means the resistance.
exactly, exactly. And so until we, yeah, as you say, accomplish their goal of liberating Timber, we are effectively under the thrall, right, of this woman and her organization and its network. And this is paralleled by the fact that Timber itself is under the thrall of Galbadia, and it's apparently like undead president, or he had an imposter, but there's got to be some kind of thing going on with him. He's a weird dude. He's old. Anyway, he's in charge. He's kind of an autocrat figure, and he is now, it looks pretty likely, in the thrall of the sorceress, right? He's allied with her, right? That's the big announcement. She's going to be his ambassador to this great, world peace conference or something. It seems like nonsense. So she seems to be really the one in charge based on the power that we see her kind of throw at first Seifer and Quistis and then the party as they run in, right? So, you know, if he sicks an imposter on us, whereas she is too powerful to even face in combat, right? It makes it pretty likely that she is the one really pulling the strings here. And so the parallel, I guess, that I'm drawing, right? There's lots of ways you could see it, but like there's a kind of nested enslavement, essentially, although it's much more, positive valence in the case of Squall and Renoa. Um, we're under contract, you want to call it that, right, to her. She's under the power of Galbadia. He's under the power, Delling, the president, is under the power of the sorceress. And the sorceress is sort of a mystery right now. We don't really know much about her. We know there have been sorceresses in the past, or at least there have been wars with sorceresses in the past. And she really kind of steals the show once she shows up here in the TV station. So I don't know, what do you make of that, like, sort of structure? And then there's also the fact that we have these pets, essentially, right? These GFs who are kind of like in thrall to us and give us all our power. So that's again the bottom layer, um, connected with the card game that I'm most interested in, of course. But
Well, I think that's a really good question, and it's interesting. I just ordered a book called Determined by Robert Sapolsky, who's this, I think, neuroscientist who
mm,
talks about how we're basically a lot more determined and have a lot less free will than we think, which
I've heard
is
of that.
I think what a lot of evolutionary psychologists and evolution and neuroscientists have discovered, particularly with the theory of the temperament, hard to get outside one's temperament. Some work they've done on sort of intelligence, even though I know that's sort of a battleground. It just seems that certain jobs are going to be more difficult. If I were to think of certain jobs for myself, I'm more verbally fluent than I am quantitative. Being a theoretical physicist would not be as up my alley as being a literary theorist.
Hmm.
And so, but also, just based on their sort of research, it seems like a person is coded to be most of what one is.
Hmm.
I think Sapolsky's thesis is going to be, and I'm going to have to read the book and I'll report back on this, is that free will, at least as we conventionally think of it, is more of a myth.
Hmm.
We need to understand that we are coded to act in, or to at least experience the world in certain ways, and certainly to feel certain emotions in certain sort of situations. To some extent, I think it's going to accord some with the theory of Jungian archetypes, that in certain situations, one is almost sure to feel certain ways.
Yeah.
Like, and I would imagine that is why a video game can be very successful in
Yes.
eliciting certain emotions. You see a main character cut down by another main character after playing the game for quite a bit of time, as we saw in VII, but don't see in VIII. And well,
So far.
sure to get an emotional response. But so all of that is just a précis to saying, or and a perambulation, a prolegomenon,
There we go.
that I think, in the same way that this story is all about time and how one's decisions refract through and echo through time, it's also an exploration of how much free will one has. And
Hmm.
there's a moment we have on the stairs, and all these moments happening in places of motion and movement, stairs or trains,
Hmm.
forest, all these limbic spaces or liminal spaces, excuse me,
Hmm. Hmm.
places between, in transitu. Um, Renoa says, must be easy for you to just take orders, even though you think I'm an amateur. And she's even called an amateur by the undead president.
That's right.
So they're judged not only by the seeds, who are themselves novices, and so therefore barely what they claim to be. So much so, so barely so, that Seifer breaks out, or Seifer breaks out of detention, basically,
Yeah.
in order to go help them, which is itself a humiliation of them, that he alone does what Squall assumes is impossible for the three of them. And so Squall is showing himself also not to be a very great leader too, with his emotions and how he treats situations. But this acceptance of his fate is something that is supposed to be part of the stoic attitude of Squall. But I think what we'll see, and even very soon, is that he wants maximal control over his fate, actually. And he said multiple times now, he doesn't want to put his trust in people. He doesn't believe in relying on other people. And so that ethos is in conflict with a stoic acceptance of fate. If he were just accepting fate, then he wouldn't be afraid to rely on people in order to avoid a certain fate. And so it's a tough question based on the protagonist's ambivalent attitude towards it, and also even ambivalent relationship to the structure you put forward, because because they're not soldiers, they're mercenaries. They're mercenaries that aren't on a traditional mission. It's a different sort of mission that Sid commissioned personally.
Yes.
It's a different sort of mission, which will have no replacements, where first year seeds that are just fresh off of their training are there. And so they're mercenaries who have just become seeds, and all of a sudden they find themselves in a situation that has an indefinite ending point, and that also has an indefinite path back home.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
and so what I see I and so this is not going to be a satisfying answer to your question because I think
Sorry.
it's going to unfold. Um, uh, I might need to watch this unfold a little bit and keep my eye on this question and continue to try and address it. But the plot has taken off.
Mhm.
We're finally out of like the first forest or the parochial concerns and have gotten onto the world scale. And Zell blabbing his mouth and saying where these three people on TV to the whole world are from. Balam Garden. He's as they say in Scott Pilgrim, he screwed the pooch, and and now and now their path home is uncertain. They have to retreat to Galbadia Garden, and so circumstances are now also guiding them in the same way that organizations are. They
Mhm.
have to rely on and also you have this system of control. Quistis Trepi is still there, even though she is no longer an instructor but a seed member. She's still called instructor by Zell. I
Yeah.
and one of them, I believe it was Zell. But she's also this this control on Squall. He is squad leader, but her authority has, at least so far in the game, supervened over his as his instructor.
Yeah.
She was giving him the details to the mission and supervising when Seifer was his squad leader. So she was,
Yes.
still above. And so I think I think to obliquely answer your question, the system of controls on the characters and how they deal with them is interesting.
Yes.
And Squall seems to want to be able to control his fate while also accepting certain constant factors. Like, which this is the strange thing about him. Like, he seems to not want to get his expectations high, but then he tries to be a seed. I'm like, that's like an elite unit that's treated like that. It's very much like Soldier in Final Fantasy VII, though perhaps not quite as elite, and there's not quite as much choice because we'll find out later these are a bunch of orphans. But like he still has aspired to improve himself, and his seed rank can go up, and he's the squad leader now, and he graduated from something. He doesn't seem to he's not, just laying about taking some barbiturate.
Well, we do beat him, in the infirmary, but he's only there because he was training against like a strong opponent, right? So yeah, I totally agree. He has some serious issues that he's uh got these tensions within his motivations, his aspirations, and then his sense of duty, it seems like, right? He has this kind of mentality like, oh, okay, it's my job, so I'll do it, but it doesn't mean I have to like it, and I don't have to like you, and I don't like you. I don't like any of you, right? So he's an interesting character. He is when you mentioned Quistis and her coming back on the scene here, she arrives kind of chasing after Seifer, right? Trying to prevent him from causing more of a ruckus than he already has. Um, and she seems to actually try to you know, calm down the soldiers who are trying, so that he doesn't kill the president on TV in front of everyone. But then once once she's, once the crisis has kind of been averted for the moment and there's relative safety, she's the one who does like bring up, okay, so what do we do now? Like, I'll quiz you, Squall, right? It's almost in that instructor mode, like, so what does the book say in this chapter, this verse? And he remembers, so he's a good student, right? She says, you always were a good student, something like that to this effect, right? Um, it's also worth remembering that she uh, does kind of save the day with the armored thing that's chasing you through Dalit. She's the one at the Gatling gun with the gunboat, and she's shooting it and finally takes it out because it's apparently unbeatable unless you do some really weird stuff. It just like keeps getting back up, keeps getting back up. So that's the kind of you know, Squall is the damsel in that case, and she's the one saving his life. He's toast. He's on the beach all by himself. But she never like throws that in his face. She never brings that up. He doesn't seem to think about it anymore, it's just another day at work for him or whatever. Whatever his catchphrase. But but then I did want to also point out that, Sid does make this kind of personal, unusual contract again, we've seen him kind of under the control of his assistants and whatever. And in this case, it's pointed out he specifically rewrote the contract to make it in like normal language that everyone could understand. And I just found that so funny. We see like him kind of running around in the background, like bustling around as the language of the contract scrolls, and it's like complete legalese at first, and everyone's like, what does that mean? It's making my head hurt. And then she's like, oh, he gave me this other contract after I said the same thing. And it's like, okay, this is very clear. Like, here's what's happening. They'll serve you until the victory's achieved, right? And you're liberated. So I really seize on all these examples of art and writing so far in the game, right? We have the musician, the pianist who wants to be a singer. We have Laguna, the soldier, like weakling soldier who's inordinately strong because he has all of our powers, and he wants to be a writer. And then in the present day, we have this artist who draws the pictures, which include a picture of that one guy from the past, apparently, is what he's working on now. And we have this guy, Sid, who is the one who's written this contract, right? So we have journalists, we have artists, we have kind of lawyer-ish figures, right, who are able to translate that into everyday normal speech. Yeah, and so the ways that the game portrays this act of creativity, this act of pursuing a dream in most of these cases, right? To make the liberation more likely, Sid goes out of his way to send his prize student, right, on his first mission there, and and locks him in until it's completed.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes me think of two things. How I think that the plot is taking off here, and I want to come back to that into the rule book 8.7 or guidebook 8.7 bit of the
Yeah,
Seed manifesto. But also I want to address the quixotic elements of the text or the book, excuse me, the RPG, the JRPG, and that I like its representations of writing and writers and artists, and that it
yeah,
comes back to Don Quixote, which itself goes to great lengths to convey characters who are literate and write, or illiterate in the case of Sancho, and in the folk tales and proverbs, but
mm,
characters like Gines de Pasamonte, who is this Hannibal-esque, extremely chained up chain gang, very bad criminal who's written his own autobiography and later becomes a puppeteer. You see
mm,
multiple processions that are phantasmagoric, one at a duke and duchess's castle, out on a hunt, one back at their home, one in a cave of Montesinos.
mm,
But then also you see players and actors who are traveling across the land, and for some reason Don Quixote does not attack them. Even the figure of death is with them. And so the tradition of art representing art in it,
yes,
one almost wonders, yes, one would expect a more loving portrayal of artists within, who are themselves nested within this work of art. And one would almost, as an artist or at least appreciator of art, um, uh, hope that there are more artists per capita in these towns and cities that we experience in the JRPG. That
yeah, yeah,
20, you might even get the impression that like 30% of people are artists, because they do some. Well, that may be part of the sort of quaint design of the JRPG, particularly when it uses the medieval topos, because most of the places you go are places that you purchase something that's made by the person there, right? Like they're an alchemist and they sell you these potions.
hmm
They're a weapons maker. And so, these are very much non-alienated from their labor sorts of people, perhaps differently from the people who produce the video games in which they're featured, though perhaps not as well. But I just wanted to mention that. But the second thing I wanted to mention was that now the the system of controls that are overtaking the students, and they're still students, right? They're still defined as students of the garden. That's why Zell has a
mm,
taken away, even though they're seeds. So I'm sort of unclear what their rank is. It seems like
yeah.
they're sort of the highest rank and they graduated, but they're still students. Uh,
I I'm a little confused by that as well. Maybe they're graduate students now. I'm not sure.
yeah, right now they get new rooms.
Yeah.
They are certainly a new rank, but now the system of controls that are in place in their lives are very different. They are not under the security of of Balam Garden in the same physical and spatial ways that they were when they were inside of the garden.
Yeah.
They were there protected by the rules and institutions and the rules of the institution and the people there to enforce them. And it's a very powerful people around them, right? Squall is, at least at this point, ostensibly not one of the stronger seeds. Um, Maybe by the end of the game, but the place that they live is this amazing shining fortress, but a place where you really can't step out of line. And if you do, there is a tremendous amount of force to help put you back into line. Now they're out in a new city, in a new place, with a new way of playing cards, under a new direct supervisor, with a new goal. Instead of become seed, which is basically work on yourself, study. It's do what you have to support this person. And something sort of interesting about that is that Squall interprets this as taking Renault's orders, but really, if you interpret the contract right, it's you. He might need to advise quite a bit and counsel. It's you get to come home when you finish this. So just taking orders might not be sufficient to this. In the same way that not giving emotional support to to the people under his squad leadership is perhaps not the best way to be a leader. Um,
For sure.
but all this goes to say is that now he's got Quistis back and he's got his memory of the procedures that he has to now keep in mind. Because even though there are significant controls on his behavior and his free will within these situations, he still needs to remember who he is to maintain his identity in the wake of these changing, determining factors in his life. He needs to, and all of them need to, especially abroad from the organization that they're a part of, have something within them that reminds them who they are, so that they don't experience sort of the existential angst of total freedom and feel totally abstracted, or free from what they're actually just very loosely tied to at this point. And so I think the controls are changing in a very unique way. I think now, even though there are forces working on Squall, he might, and I think all of these characters might feel sort of like things are getting out of control.
Mhm.
Now there are so many actors working against them, and maybe even directly against them, that there is an overwhelming feeling of not knowing what to do and not knowing how to handle what's coming, and so needing something to anchor them during this time of overwhelming anxiety about the immediate future. Um, it's
Are you
hard.
thinking, go ahead.
No, go on. Sorry.
Are you thinking about the dream sequences here, right? Like as you said, it's like on the journey to their first mission, they have the first dream sequence, and it provides a kind of a funny but there's a kind of pathos to it also, image of this kind of budding romance, right? A very Quixotesque kind of character in Laguna, right? Pining for his Dulcinea. But she turns out to be pretty great, actually, right? It's not entirely a figment of his imagination as far as we can tell. And he falls asleep within the dream, right? He like drifts off, wakes up on her bed, and she's just kind of like waiting for him to finish his story, and finally ask her about herself, right? And so there's a lot of humor to go with the romance and all that, right? And then we have, coming up here, now that, as you say, things have gotten a little bit more unexpected and the stakes are raised even more, we're going to have another dream sequence that's going to sort of maybe ground us, or at least give us, again, some sort of way of seeing a parallel life, right? That will help us reflect on our situation. Um, and as you say, there's also, of course, the garden itself, which has its parallel in Galbadia. There's a Galbadia garden. This is, I think, the first we've heard about that. As much as the Galbadian soldiers are a joke, if there is a garden there, there's some other powerful, forces in the world after all. And of course, there's the sorceress herself, right? So there's something about, um, you know, finding our way to a kind of other home, right? And finding out how to get there. And whenever we're on these journeys, by way of sort of looking back at a parallel party, a group of people who were doing something similar 17 years ago. Um, and on the Quixote thing, did you notice in the hotel of Timber, there's that model of the city and it has a windmill on top? If you go in the hotel lobby, you can interact with the person who's looking at the model too, and she'll say, there's a little bit of dialogue basically between Squall and Renoa there about whether this model is better or worse than the model train that Renoa had made for them to do the right. And of course you can sort of diss her by saying that this model is way better, which it totally is. Except for the fact that as far as I can tell, this must be an old, version of the town because there's no windmills in Timber now. There is like a lot of very cool architecture everywhere. The amount of detail and labor that was put into all of these backgrounds and the camera sort of pans around during fights and you can sort of see the rooftops and stuff. It's all very, very splendid and cool. Um, but yeah, just that little detail of the windmill, I think is quite cool, quite telling.
Maybe that like forest, owls and foxes coming from timber is sort of indication of the projected maybe that's a projection of their aims to be free, and then maybe that's like their windmill to some extent. Like it
There you
seems like
go.
an impossible task, or maybe an indication, a meta indication that it is in fact another one of these sort of literary windmill places. But I agree with you that the art of the town is very pretty and almost an Emerald City
Yeah.
esque theme to it, very green.
Mhm.
While also it reminds me of Zozo, the City of Thieves from 66, because you encounter random battles there.
Battles.
But
Yeah,
it's
but these battles are so much easier. It's
yes,
again, it's like Seifer had the right idea. These guys no matter how many soldiers there are, it doesn't matter. They don't have GFs. They use fire, but their attacks are pitiful, right? I mean, so yes, I think there's some sort of plot thing that makes it necessary that Squall is like the clear thinker here. He's like, yeah, we can't go in guns blazing on this. And then Seifer's like, yeah, I'm just gonna go in, right? Because that's their characters again. But realistically, in terms of what we have seen, we totally could have gone in and just taken the president, right? I guess that would throw us into conflict directly with the sorceress and
you
mess
know,
everything up. But
because that might be another instance of Squall just, and I think in fact is another instance of Squall just taking the letter of the law,
hmm,
go black textualist reading of what he hears, and Seifer again thinking on his own. But I wanted to contrast them, and now I think this actually helps the contrast, in that we were talking about freedom and determinism, or freedom and slavery to some extent. What extent is in fact a person free, or a character free in this narrative, this JRPG? But we see Sieber here breaking out of his garden, and in fact breaking away from it in this moment, right? He breaks away from his entire dominance hierarchy and command structure,
yeah,
the one that he's been a part of his entire life. And he doesn't do that by ascending to seed and now getting past the rules that apply to him. He does it by going against the will of his place, to such an extent that he is surely expelled at this point. And Quistis, acting in sort of a Professor McGonagall way, chases him down, perhaps hoping that he wouldn't be as foolish as Zeldink and say that as he attempts to kidnap the president, he is from Balam Garden. But he is offered a choice. We see him offered a choice by this The sorceress, will soon know her name. We don't at this point. We know that it's Adea.
Yeah.
She doesn't even take her red hawk-like mask off, and she appears out of this curtain. And
Yeah.
she magic, I think, twice.
Yeah.
Once just against Quistis, and then once against the whole party. So right, she does. We can't even fight her yet, but she keeps calling Seifer boy.
Mm-hmm.
But a problem with like the insult boy, and why a lot of, I think, gentlemen like to be not called boy, is that it's a reduction of agency. It's like when you're called Alejandrito rather than Alejandro,
Yeah.
little Alex. This diminutive takes away your agency to some extent. And he is trying to assert his agency in the same way that Squall is trying to assert his by achieving and now being a seed, but then doing what he thinks is right, which is just following orders at this point, in order to get to the next step. He thinks that's agency. Seifer, in the same way as he demonstrated during the seed test, thinks that freedom is breaking away from
Yeah.
and just doing what he thinks is right in any particular moment, which in both cases it was right. Like the Dalek communication tower, he gets it done. He does more than Seed asked of him. Here,
Right.
he gets to the president. He does what three could not or refused to do, perhaps because of their Seed contract. He acts with an increased sense of agency here.
Yes.
But in that moment, he has increased agency, but immediately following it, his agency starts to diminish. He has been caught by these other three seeds. Now Zell reveals where they're from. He finds himself in unknown territory, no longer supported by the Garden Institution, totally out on his own. What happens? This dark anima mage figure, this sorceress shows up, and in the tradition, I'd say, of the strong female characters in Final Fantasy, particularly 6 and 7 and 8. Terra with her, she's basically like Ares plus Sephiroth combined in terms of her level of ability compared to anybody else's. Edgar is pretty strong, but he can't fly for God's sake like a Super Saiyan. And then, yeah, right, like Ares and Genova and Scarlet even in the business world. And of course Elena with the Turks. But Final Fantasy VIII, you get this Adea pulling the strings, it seems like, at this point. And she calls this character who has kidnapped the president boy over and over again. What does that mean? Is she denying him agency? She says, make a choice. And the choice is interesting. If he goes back, he's becoming a man. But if he comes with her, he's not. Was I believe actually the choice, but he chooses problems. And so I'm wondering, I wonder about that bifurcation. I want to make sure I have that right, though. But
I'm looking at the text. Yeah. So the text says, he's got Quistis is there. She's been incapacitated by the shiny light. Seifer's still got his gun blade to the president's throat, and Edea says, the boy in you is telling you to come. The adult in you is telling you to back off. You can't make up your mind. You don't know the right answer. You want help, don't you? You want to be saved from this predicament.
yes,
Shut up.
your
Right.
boy in you wants to come. You want to be saved. It's a reduction of agency. It's
Yes.
It's a regression to follow the witch into the woods.
Yes.
But
Place of no return. Bid farewell to your childhood. So it's interesting that when he does come with her, she says it in terms of bid farewell to your childhood. That seems to be a reversal, right?
even though the boy in you is the one who leads you here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's very interesting. I mean, I wonder if that could be meant in two different senses. Say goodbye to the world you know, because you are choosing to remain a child, but you can't. But you've chosen now this approach to being an adult because you're in an adult situation now.
And we know that Seifer has a dream, right? He was about to tell us his romantic dream back at the last time that he did something like this, pulled the stunt at the communications tower. And of course he doesn't have a chance to do a big speech just yet, but it looks like he is living out some version of his dream here, right? And the lighting is very different. There's something weird about the aesthetics of this backstage, this behind the curtain world that he's entering.
Well, this
Uh,
is very quixotic, right? He is
mhm,
now venerating this masked woman who he doesn't know anything about, who is promising to save him as he, as this sort of odd figure of a knight with a sword,
yeah.
follows along her. I mean, if one wanted to try some sort of allegorical understanding or a beginning of it, it might be that he, like Don Quixote, is following some deluded ideal here, or he
Mhm,
gives up some ideal that is rooted, grounded in reality, to follow one that will, you know, he might be leaving his childhood for death, not for adulthood.
yes.
Um, and 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 I find it interesting that when he's got his sword to the throat of the president, it's behind his neck. And his
Yeah.
sword's also turned backwards. So it's like the trigger
Yeah.
is, so I don't know if that like explodes or something like that. And but but right. So his childhood certainly is at an end. His life is changing, but she seems to offer him a passivity. You
Mhm.
want to be saved. And ultimately his attitude is not the mature attitude of saving, which is at least what Squall is attempting to do. And
Exactly.
Quistis, they are attempting to save not just themselves, but individuals. They are not attempting to be saved. And so
Yeah.
I I wonder if in limiting their agency to a code and to following orders to some extent, they have an implicit faith that this increases their agency over the long term. Seifer has had this moment of glory. That's all it is. It's immediately supplanted by what next? He has no clue what to do
Right.
next. He's made a huge mistake. And he follows that by maybe making the next huge mistake, which is to follow the person who looks like she's going to be the antagonist of the game. I mean, there was a worldwide broadcast made to introduce her, and she looks a lot different from just some guy in a tie, you know. Even
We've seen her before in the prequel sort of cinematic, right? Like we know of this person. Um, but yeah, this is her first appearance in the playable version of the game.
she seems to have a magic in a way others do not. I don't know if she has items to have magic, and she can atomize herself and transport herself through some sort of portal thing. And in the first cinematic had like 20-foot long hair. Everything about her seems like divine,
Yeah.
celestial, like not quite physical in nature, powerful. So perhaps what we are seeing here are the contrasting dreams of
Mhm.
Seifer and Squall, and Seifer's is manifested by this figure, this dark sorceress figure who is also a political actor as well. Maybe a figure of someone who acts with power outside the scope of normal authority, and that's something that appeals to Seifer. Like he would be someone who would join the Foot Clan in the Ninja Turtles world.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that I think you see contrasting approaches to agency
Yeah.
in these two foil-like characters who are both attempting to experience build-ups. Um, and 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 not insignificant the fact that Seifer's intent for doing this seems to be not for Idea at first, but because he had some sort of romance with Renoa.
Right.
It was because he was infuriated at Sid only sending 3 seeds to help Renoa after Renoa had apparently told him a lot about this. And so there is a shared ideal um, uh, embodied in Renoa's figure of Seifer and Squall, and that Seifer was actually interested in Renoa, and Squall might be, and at least will be, interested, but that's going to break into Seifer following Adia and Squall continuing to follow Renoa.
Mhm.
So currently Squall's following a real woman who seems to be subject to traditional spatio-temporal forces,
Yes.
and Seifer is not, which gives him sort of an advantage, one might imagine, at the moment, but we'll actually see immediate evidence that it has weakened him, right? Because I think the first fight we get with him is coming up under this Arc de Triomphe like passageway, and he is extremely weak. And
Okay.
and it's even something that Squall mentions. He's like Seifer dot 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 at the end of it. Like if you're strong enough, you can beat him with like I think one strike by Squall. Not
I see.
really boss. And this is like I think the last fight before Disc 2,
Mm.
which
So kind of underwhelming. Yeah, conclusion.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, he hasn't been able to train. And it's clear you've been getting stronger, and he no.
Yeah.
No, and that too, in like sort of a Spinozist way, is a reduction in agency. That even though,
Yeah.
again, he can act outside the normal scope of the narrative and doesn't have to be a part of your party, when you come into conflict, he gets crushed. Though he'll upset this later by being the one that destroys Odin. Uh,
Ah,
And so I think these questions about agency and free will and the contrast between Seifer and Squall are really rich.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way to frame it. Like he's outside of the constraints of what we have to do as the player, mostly is follow what people are telling us to do. Whereas he, as this kind of alter ego rival figure, is continually blowing things up by doing what's unexpected, what's not supposed to happen, what's not supposed to be possible, right? And now he's put himself under the control of someone who does very much that too, right? But even more so because she sort of walks through walls and who knows what power she has over space-time. Um, yeah, and apparently is going to inaugurate a reign of world peace, right? On behalf of the president of the most autocratic, you know, um, fascist seeming state that we have encountered.
When they
And
resolve a few things.
but once we resolve a few things, yeah, just a few
And
things.
we just have to understand what those specific details are. Having also my background in foreign policy, like those few things could be very important. But and that's something I think we should do an episode on specific features of this
Mm,
game once we finish, like mythology, maybe foreign policy. That's not as interesting as other things. But the thing that I was actually going to say is sorry, I'm forgetting what it was, but we should have specific features in any case at the
yeah,
end where we talk about particular aspects of the game like free will, determinism, and really wrap those up,
cool,
especially because we're starting to develop them now, and we'll see where they get to
cool.
by the end.
No, I actually am pretty interested in the ways that this recapitulates in a kind of fantastic way, like a pretty recognizable geopolitical thing happening, right? Like this looks pretty much like France, right? This timber, let's call that France. They've got the resistance. Galbadia, let's call that Germany. It's invading people left and right, but it's doing it in a kind of weird way. So that's different. But the seeds from Balam, they're basically England, right? Because they go on boats to get places. So there's like it goes under the channel. So I think there is pretty close to a one-to-one analog here for at least those from what we've seen so far, those are the kind of the three countries that we're supposed to be picturing. And everything is in this kind of Art Deco, Art Nouveau rather, old world, very beautiful, very opulent. We haven't found the slums yet, like in Final Fantasy VII, right? We're very much in like the nice plazas, the nice parts of town. Everything is very, yeah, glittery, shiny, Emerald City. So, yeah.
That that's exactly what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Because so therein we find embedded within it sort of the medieval fantasy space, and that often itself features stylized conflicts between either, you know, European powers in Northern Africa, Muslims and Christians, or England and France, or various European powers against each other. But that in it having this glitzy sort of veneer, I think it enters a sort of uncanny valley, not the traditional one of being too human, but of being a little too glitzy and not quite rugged
Yeah.
enough, seeming a little too Barbie and Ken for individuals. Something that I think
Yeah.
people, critics of Final Fantasy 15 found about it. It's a little too pretty
Mm.
for their tastes. Whereas Final Fantasy 7, the aesthetic is well, like suburban or urban metropolis for the spaces, but the characters themselves still look, because they have sprites, like
Yeah.
sort of fantasy-esque and
Yeah.
cartoons. And so
Totally.
the loss of the sprites, I think, makes the characters look a little too polished. And particularly in the remastered version, when you can see their faces, uh, it's a
Yeah.
different experience.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that Final Fantasy VIII does seem to rehash so many elements of Final Fantasy VII, sort of Final Fantasy VI, over
Yes.
and over. Having an antagonist who is, in fact, a smokescreen antagonist, who is the actual antagonist for the vast majority of the or of the game. Or rather, the smokescreen is the one that you that you think is the actual villain, until the very end. This is something Final Fantasy IX does as well,
Uh-huh.
and sort of Final Fantasy 16, I think. But the fact that there's sort of a world order coming to be based on a political or business organization. Shinra, it's hard to call it just a business organization because they obviously have these elite fighting forces. They're like Ballant
Yeah.
Garden plus the political structure. It's like
Yeah.
Galbadia plus Galbadia Garden as well.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
But exactly, you see that world dominating desire coming back through. But again, in like Final Fantasy 7, like Final Fantasy 6 was getting at, but they still had kingdoms, but they had tech knights that were getting into the technology. They you see how an organization that would wish to dominate the world morphs in the imagination of the game creators from a pure fantasy into a scientific business fantasy into an educational institution plus political force fantasy,
Yeah.
because of it, with magic
Yeah. 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 That's
at,
interesting.
at its age, at its age. So not only do you see actual real geopolitical similarities in what's happening, as you said, and with real Western European nations, but just a morphing of the same concept. And this is what we were waiting for in the first bit, right? How does this kid who's injured in a hospital go to saving the world? Oh, he doesn't even have his GF. He doesn't even have his hero license yet. He still
Yeah.
needs to go win his sword, basically. And only now are we starting to see the world significance of the events that he and his friends have now helped to antagonize. And so now we see again that the stakes are the world level. And there's not yet a meteor coming to destroy the world, but there's certainly maybe a Shinra-esque organization trying to invade Wutai and exert control over a large majority of it, Galbadia in particular. But I think I've rambled on past when we intended to go, my friend.
Okay.
But looking forward to playing more of this, continuing to get into it, and then getting into more specific subjects. And if people are listening alongside, please feel free to suggest specific subjects you'd like us to get into, philosophy, religion, whatever it is.
Yes.
We can give it the old college try, give it a crack.
Give it
Uh,
the old garden try. Yes.
the old garden try, that's right.
Sounds
Um,
good.
well, until we give our next try, it was wonderful seeing you, my friend, and I'm looking forward to continuing to adventure down the rabbit hole and through this particular side quest.
Appreciate it. Thank you again. See ya.